Hello, painters. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations.
Thank you so much for joining us one last time in the Yumi Book Club. We've had so much fun going back over this incredibly dense Cosmere book, learning and staying with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I still think one of the most beautiful.
It's truly so much in this book.
It goes so deep. We are going to have to come back and revisit. These episodes have always been our instant reaction to the secret projects, whatever 1, 2, 3, 4 it happens to be. This is a moment in time, but I definitely think that we're going to be revisiting.
Maybe we need to do a year of Sanderson debrief.
Exactly.
After we've completed all of the book clubs, then we'll go back and then be like, okay, with all of this information, let's put it all together. What does it mean?
Yeah, I think there's building aspects of the Cosmere going on here with the secret projects. We know that they were a surprise and they were, done because of COVID and Emily, and we've talked about that so many times now. But we also have to imagine that Brandon wanted to accomplish something in moving the Cosmere story forward. And he used these secret projects to do that in small offshoot ways, but ways that we should expect are going to come back into the main story, like Aethers, for example, in Tress.
Yeah, I think these function a little bit like the novellas that occur in between books of the Stormlight Archive, where, yes, they are standalone stories, but they are adding depth and context and important information to the main storyline.
Let's take a moment to set us in time, because we are recording this on October 1st, year of the Sanderson.
You all know what that means. We have just gotten Secret Project 4.
We are going to be making our way through that over the next couple of weeks and eventually starting, for the patrons first, the Secret Project number 4 book club. No spoilers, not even names or titles.
Not at this time, yes.
We will not be including any information from that. We haven't even read that much to include any information.
Not too much to spoil yet.
But just in case, we're not even going to say the title of that, but Secret Project number 4 is out. This will be our last Yumi Book Club episode, and then you can expect on Patreon us to be starting up the Secret Project number 4 book club in just a couple of weeks here, probably in October of Year of the Sanderson.
For now, let's continue focusing on Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, because we have at long last come to what is usually our final episode of a series, all of the Cosmere connections. Now, this book is, as we've said, quite dense in terms of Cosmere connection, but this episode is going to be focusing specifically on the world hoppers that exist in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, starting with Hoyd, who has an incredibly interesting role, different than we have ever seen him.
Incapable of movement
and speech.
Lacking all ability to weave a story, and yet he still weaves a story together. And that's where I'd kind of like to start us. The question
I would like to place us in time first.
That's good. Okay,
because
set
as
first.
We just said, these books sort of fitting into the greater Cosmere. I suspect that this story, at the very least, takes place after Stormlight Archive 4, probably after Stormlight Archive 5 as well. I mean, and then in between that and let's say Tress of the Emerald Sea, who the heck knows what is happening?
Yeah, or how much time passes there.
Exactly. But I think or suspect that this story happens before Tress of the Emerald Sea, because Design is still with Hoyd during the events of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, and we didn't see Design in Tress of the Emerald Sea, which I don't think I realized until now, but maybe we mentioned that in the Tress book club.
It makes a lot of sense that they are unified, and that after such a long time away, during Yumi, which takes 3 years of Hoid's life and Design's life as well, that there may be a reason for separation. We don't know how Design is getting off planet. Currently, we think that's impossible for Spren. They managed to do it. And so the question is like, what changes? We don't know if Design has to return to Rashar, if they're called back in some way.
I mean, quite a bit. Yeah, we see quite a bit of advancement in terms of capabilities in Yumi. So again, that sort of categorization of like, it happens after Stormlight 5 could be anywhere in, thousands of years potentially.
I am really curious about the overall timeline. We talked previously in the book club about a user and the 17th Shard who's putting together a comprehensive timeline. And I think that's going to continually be beneficial going forward, especially as these secret projects may have been released in different orders than they
actually occur.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so we'll, in that debrief, next year, past the year of Sanderson, we'll come back to all the secret projects and hopefully have a little bit more context, maybe some context that we'll be picking up at Dragonsteel Convention this year.
Ooh, yeah, maybe.
Tell me a little bit more about Hoid's purpose, Design's purpose, like what is going on with them in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter.
Hoid and Design originally came to the planet specifically to study how weird the nightmares are, and like this phenomenon of nightmares emerging from a cloud of raw investiture, which seems pretty unique, or at least somewhat unique. And so Hoid and Design have come here to investigate that. However, as we know, as soon as they arrived on the planet, Hoid was, as he says, frozen in time. Quote, "I arrived on the planet and immediately froze in place, unable to move," end quote. And then is turned into a hat rack, whimsically.
Not the planet of whimsy, but the hat rack Hoid is definitely the most whimsical thing we see in Yumi in the Nightmare Painter. I find it so intriguing that they know of the nightmares, like off-world.
Yeah.
There's some, I can't tell if there's other world hoppers who are bringing the message off of Komashi.
Yes, but I want to just focus on Hoid and Design for a moment, and then we're going to talk about like how frequented this planet seems to be by world hoppers.
Yeah, but clearly frequented enough that word is getting out about the shroud, because it got out to Hoid and Design, motivating them to show up. And then the instant that Hoid shows up, he's frozen in place purposefully, which is a revelation we have at the end of the story. Hoid says this, quote, "Remember that time I got my memories stolen?"
Yes, it was hilarious.
"It was humiliating," I said. "I instituted protection protocols to defend me if something tried to play games with my soul. When we landed here, that machine tried to draw my investiture. My protocols activated," end quote. So he built in a defense network, a mini Jarvis, if you will.
Seemingly because of what we see at the end of Rhythm of War with Odium messing with his memory.
Definitely seems to be referring directly to that moment. And we know that Hoid has his memory somehow tied up in his investiture, maybe his breath specifically. And so I kind of think that he also used a little bit of Elantrian hacking, programming. You know how
He's not an Elantrian at this point.
I don't think. We think that Tress happens later. He knows of Elantrians, though. He's been to the world and he experiences the magic. And there's some aspect that he has built a defense network that operates without his conscious ability, right? As if it's a program just waiting to be turned on by an attack.
It's a trap. Yeah. He's just like set up a little, like a rabbit trap.
A simple stick and box.
Yeah.
And the father machine reaches out, tripping the stick, and then is Hoid himself trapped inside the box.
Yeah. And he's just like, "You can't get me."
Exactly. I'll just stay inside this box now of copper frozen in time Hoid.
Yeah.
But what happens next leads to the entire story, because Hoid is trapped within that box of himself. he seemingly should not be able to have influence outside of himself.
Yeah. I mean, this was my first question, right? If we go back to the first episode of the Yumi book club, I was like, I don't really understand how Hoid is able to tell this story. And I don't really like that he is technically the narrator. And the explanation that we're given, which I find unsatisfying, and maybe it's purposefully so, Hoid says he's able to, well, at first he started hearing voices from Painter more clearly, supposedly because Painter is like closer physically to Hoid, and then more distantly he's also able to hear Yumi. And then at some point he's also able to see images sort of painted into his mind, and he says, quote, like they were, well, painted for me in magenta and teal directly into my brain. Sometimes I saw what happened as faint representations, just 2 lines vaguely in the shapes of people. Other times I saw paintings or full motion images. I seemed to have some control over which it became depending on my level of attention, end quote.
I want to stop and really explore this because I think it's kind of the sum total of all the questions we've been having. As you said, one of the very first questions you had, and then everything that we discussed in this book club about the father machine and the High-on lines, the spirits and the nightmares, cognitive shadows, it kind of all seems to be swirling back to what Hoid is experiencing here. He is getting images in magenta and teal, which to me is the High-on lines.
I think magenta and teal is just the color of investiture on Komashi.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
He is being told the story of Painter, Yumi, Leon. He is being like presented it as the High-on lines also present.
Yeah, like the television
show. And I think what is going on, this is my complete speculation, but the answer to the question of like what is happening to Hoid is that he shows up on the planet with a deep gravity well of investiture. He's so like heavily invested that he is an abnormality, right? Mm-hmm. And so the planetary investiture, represented by the High-on lines, naturally like flows to him like water, and I think is somehow communicating with this cognitive part of Hoid. The thing that is still conscious over these 3 years is basically having a cognitive realm conversation only with the spirits.
I guess
via the High-on lines.
I still don't really understand how that is actually like happening though. You know, like what is the practicality?
The practical application, or like how does it physically happen? What's your question?
Both. Like, is he being touched by 2 High-on lines and that's why they can like speak directly into his brain? Or like how is he connecting to the investiture on the planet, especially when most of the investiture is tied up in the father machine? It's not really just like floating around freely, or else I would say like spirits probably just saw him and were like, hey, let's talk to this guy. He's really invested. But all of the spirits are being held captive by the machine.
Yes, and I think that there is a lot of questionable control that the father machine has on the spirits. Leon being the primary example.
Leon's not a spirit, though. Leon is a nightmare, which is different. But
okay, I understand.
I'm glad that you bring up Leon because this is even a further complication. Later on in the book, much later, he admits that he actually wasn't only seeing through the eyes of Painter and Yumi, but it actually started with Leon. And he says, quote, I think that the spirits were watching Leon in particular. Then some irregularities about my specific nature tapped into the spiritual communication, letting me see what was happening, end quote. So there is some type of spiritual communication happening between and Leon. And Hoid sort of inserts himself into the middle of that communication, which still doesn't really explain to me why he would see like both sides of the story, why he would see Yumi and Painter while they're in Yumi's world and while they're in Painter's world.
I think that what is going on is that the spirits, who we know at the end of the story, kind of like take up the role of, if you compensate us and don't treat us as slaves, we will continue to operate your society.
Yeah.
I think those spirits are interested in the fact that a storyteller of Hoid's note has arrived on their planet and wants to tell him the coolest story that they know of, which is Leone's, because of the 1700 years that she has been reincarnated to play this role, she is on the verge of breaking free. And if she breaks free, then Yumi can break free and the father machine can be destroyed. The setup is, this is going on their planets. The spirits are already interested in Leone. They're already aware of the Yokihijo's capture and imprisonment by the father machine.
Is it the spirits, like the little blobs? Because the quote just says there's some type of spiritual communication happening.
I think that spiritual communication is Hoid talking specifically about his ability to witness or view what is going on. And I think that's because the spirits are interested in Leone, Painter, and Yumi. They're in some way setting all of this up.
So the
like a show.
spirits are able to watch everyone on the planet, even though they are currently enslaved. And then Hoid just like watches their feed, basically.
I think that's correct. That Hoid is basically viewing what they are already interested in. Like the spiritual energy, the investiture is being directed at this grand play that is going on, this really cool thing that's happening on their planet. All the spirits are interested. And Hoid, because he's so heavily invested, is basically able to like extend himself out a little bit, enough to tap into the High-On lines or whatever, the spiritual energy, the investiture of the planet. And so he too is like piggybacking on the spirits viewing the story going on. And we know that the spirits are kind of motivated by virtuosity, by creation, and by storytelling. And so I think that their focus is basically attuned to Painter and Yumi's story.
I wonder if Hoid
is able to radio drop in.
I wonder if Hoid was able to do this because he is similar to the spirits in that he is also attracted to creativity and like emotion.
I don't think that's that far off.
And they're like, your soul kind of looks like ours. Come party with us.
Yeah, they're light weavers, right?
Come to our Super Bowl party, basically. We're like all gathered around watching this story happen.
We did a whole like 5 episodes on the stories that Hoid tells. And now finally someone gets to say, you be the audience. Watch our show. We actually froze you in place specifically so that you would have to sit there and stop talking.
No, watch this.
Yeah. We want to show off. And I don't think it's that direct or that specific, but I do think that Hoid is functionally piggybacking on what the spirits are already interested in. And that's how he's able to view it and eventually regurgitate this story to the Rasharans.
I think that's a fine explanation. I don't really like it just as, again, like a literary convention, but I guess it's fine. Let's move on to design and how she has changed since we saw her last, because she's changed quite a bit.
Yes, as you said, design was not apparent in Tress, even though Hoid was such a huge part of that book. And we've been led to believe that once bonded, Radiant and Spren cannot easily separate.
But we also believe that design couldn't get off world, so clearly a lot that we know about that bond may not necessarily be true as we move forward in the chronological timeline.
Yeah, did the thing that allowed them to go off world also allow them to operate more
independently?
Yeah. And like,
I'm curious. The thing that keeps coming to mind for me is in Elantris, people who were bonded to a Scion before they become Hoed, or I think even just after they go through the Riad, their Scion also gets affected and just bobs around in sort of a listless, like catatonic way. And I'm just curious if when Hoid was cursed, did something like that also happen to Design? And so they weren't necessarily completely separated. They might still have a bond, but they're both sort of like floating aimlessly rather than being more actively pulled together. And
That's
so
an interesting
Design is
speculation.
just sort of like bopping around somewhere, also like somewhat crazy or delusional or something. And then maybe when Hoid is relieved of his curse, Design also is relieved, and then they can like find each other again, maybe.
Yeah, that's not a bad example because we've seen Syl devolve when Kaladin is not at his best mentally and living up to his oaths. Syl kind of withdraws back in and becomes more Windspren-like. Maybe when Hoid was cursed, Design reverted in a way where she just hid, and she was maybe around as like a little Design on the ship the whole time, but was not cognizantly Design anymore.
I feel like there would have been some type of literary mention of Tress seeing a pattern if Design was there, and I don't recall seeing that. But listeners, if you recall seeing something like that in Tress, give us a shout out.
Now, jumping over to Komashi and Design situation here, she's owning a noodle shop. This is a working woman. She's out there.
She has a body.
Well, yes, she is also fully interacting, although I think people kind of know there's something suspect about Design.
Yeah.
There is also...
She's not super good at being human.
Yeah, let's go over to the quote. A little bit of a long one, but it's a fun one. Let's play around with it. Quote, Design did not do a good job acting human. I take no blame, as she repeatedly refused my counsel on the matter. At least her disguise was holding up. People did wonder why the strange noodle shop woman had long white hair, despite appearing to be in her early 20s. She wore tight dresses, and many of the painters had crushes on her. She insisted, you see, that I make her disguise particularly striking, or well, I should say it in her words.
Make me pretty so they'll be extra disturbed if my face ever unravels. And give me voluptuous curves because they remind me of a graphed cosine. And also because boobs look fun.
It wasn't an actual body. We all kind of learned our lesson on that. But rather a complicated wireframe light weaving with force projections attached directly to her cognitive element as it manifested in the physical realm. End quote.
Lots of fun things in that quote. I particularly like that Design wanted to look like a graphed cosine.
And also because boobs look fun.
Yeah.
Which everybody, I think, agrees to. I love this fact that there is a progression, an evolution, an understanding, and like a changing of Design over time. They want to become more human. We knew that from Syl's relationship, like becoming more cognizant, becoming more herself, and Design seemingly taking that further, wanting more and more of a physical body.
Yeah, and we've seen some progress, or at least exploration being made to that end in Rhythm of War.
How so? Tell me about it.
Ishar's experiments that are unveiled, and it seems he's trying to take the way that they appear in the cognitive realm and make it manifest physically in the physical realm, but that does not work because their cognitive bodies don't follow the laws of physics in the physical world, and they are all like terrible dead experiments.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture.
Which I'm assuming is what Hoid is saying here by we all kind of learned our lesson on that. Like, we can't actually make them an actual body, but Hoid has figured out sort of a way around that by using force projections attached directly to her cognitive element as it manifested in the physical realm. Can we break that down at all?
Yeah, let's take that step by step, because I think this is an evolution of the ability that we see with Shallan.
Yes.
She is able to put a light weaving onto pattern, and then pattern moves around, and the
pattern
light weaving
sort of just acts as an anchor for it.
An anchor.
He is like the weight at the bottom of the balloon.
Yes, and kind of like keeping it kind of grounded.
Yeah.
And seemingly, he's also able to give it some motion, Shallan sketches movement frame by frame type of thing. And then
he just moves.
He just moves.
And then the image does what the image does.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. But I think that the specific difference that we have here with design is that design wants to fill in what would be that light weaving. And Hoid describes it as a complicated wireframe light weaving. And so that's kind of step one. I imagine design, if she's acting as the anchor just on the ground, Hoid builds a lattice of light weaving up from design's physical form, the like little embossed
her little
image.
Pattern.
Yes, the pattern that is design. Hoid builds on top of that a wireframe lattice, giving vague shape, almost like if you've seen Foundation or Westworld, how like the robots sometimes underneath have just a frame that makes up their skeleton. It's not really like how human skeletons look, because that would be silly to make an exact copy of all of our flaws. They instead have kind of like a frame exoskeleton covered in some skin or muscle or whatnot. That's how I imagine it, but just built out of light. And then the force projection part is what we see Shallan and even Yasna do. Shallan specifically at the Battle of Thalen Field, like giving her light weavings weight and force.
More substance.
Hoid basically providing that shape, and the design says, I would be happy to fill that, and takes over it more fully. And then she has control and is maybe not restricted in the same way that Shallan's drawings are, where it can like only walk as Shallan animates. I think the design has full ability, like more a robot sentience dropped into the physical robot.
Yeah.
That's almost what I think is going on.
A huge difference from what we've seen so far. And I'm curious how much of that is simply down to Hoid's experience and his many centuries, likely, of doing things like light weaving, and how much of it is truly new discovery of possibility.
Both are going on. We should expect a lot of new discoveries, combinations of abilities is something Brandon played around with a lot in Mistborn Era 2, and is continually always kind of keeping in the background of all the other magic systems with resonant points.
Yeah.
So I would expect, Hoid, someone who would have multiple magic systems stacked on top of one another, is also learning new things about how those magic systems interact. And then he has the knowledge of the deep Cosmere and maybe like Yolish light weaving.
Right.
That operates maybe closer to like wireframe light weaving, because it's, I've seen like some people talk about the sand magic and mastery on Taldane being used to like shape things in a storytelling way. Like we didn't see this in the actual comic, but the idea that like you could make a 3D model of a person kind of walk around with enough sand mastery.
Yeah.
And maybe that's kind of more what Yolish light weaving is. It's kind of like, drawing up a more physical force.
Well, we think we see Yolish light weaving in Warbreaker when Hoid tells Ciri the story.
And he uses sand then, right? Or like a dust?
I think it's just smoke.
Okay,
yeah, it's like different color powders that sort of color the smoke coming out of a fire, I think.
That sounds right to my memory. Basically that Hoid might have other known light weaving or magic abilities that allow him to imagine doing this now that he has the bond with design.
Of course. Another fun fact about design is that she is able to see and slightly modify spirit webs. We especially see her do this in extending the leash between Yumi and Painter. And she says that that's kind of the extent of what she can do on her own, but she has a device that can do all of these things with more power or precision.
A device that can manipulate spirit webs sounds very dangerous. And I am curious what that device is. If I was going to guess, I would say that the mother of machines made that device.
Ooh, love it.
That's Navani for all the folks following along.
Obviously.
Have we said hashtag all spoilers all the time yet in, the 35 minutes that we've been talking?
We, for I think the first time, hear a description of a spirit web. Quote, design, stretching something glowing between her fingers like a cord made of light, a glowing rope whose ends vanished into nothing, end quote. I imagine her like holding a cat's cradle,
That's fun. I was kind of thinking about the images of like the fates with the threads.
Yeah, but they usually
of
only
existence.
have one thread.
Yes, a single thread representing a single person's life is normally how it's shown. But if you imagine then everybody's threads together, like I've also seen it on a loom type of thing with like all the threads coming off and then like spiraling together to like make up the pattern or whatnot. And you could like pick apart a single thread that would represent one person. That's kind of how I see design. Like she had twirled a thread around her fingers and was kind of playing it with like cat's cradle-esque, making the shapes and whatnot. Is there maybe one of the cat's cradle secondary positions that is called like the spirit web? I feel like that's just waiting to be invented.
I don't remember learning that one.
If you did, the description might go something like this. Quote, your spirit web, design was saying, knows what body is yours. It remains connected to it. You see, you form connections like that with everyone, and to a lesser extent, everything you've known. Nifty, eh? End quote.
This is the sort of explanation around Yumi and Painter's body swap and why they are appearing the way that they appear, etc. Which is very interesting that there is a connection between your spirit web and your body.
I think that makes perfect sense. The web, entangled around the physical body. We've talked a lot about the importance of the connection between three realms, physical, cognitive, and spiritual, and maybe the disastrous implications of someone who has severed the connections to their physical body, losing out on this description that design is talking about.
Yeah.
Losing out on the connection maybe to everything that is physical, the whole world. Like she's saying, and to a lesser extent, everything.
Yeah.
If you are a cognitive shadow only who has been separated from their physical body, you might be separated from all connections to the physical world. And then what are you left with? You are left with Kelsier in
Kelsier was already a psychopath. And then now he is just like incapable of making connections to anyone.
That's what I'm worried about. It's not necessarily what we saw in The Lost Metal, where he had clearly advanced to what we would label as Thydakar. But I think I'm worried about that regard, especially when it comes to the conversations that he had with Harmony and the kind of like vague
threats.
The threats seem kind of obvious, but like the vague recollection of, hey man, I killed our quote unquote God, Lord Ruler before. I ain't got no problem with you. Or if I want to go to that step, I can. And he's currently not there. But like, what does that mean for the future? How does that develop?
Yeah.
And does he continually, push harder on the Ghostbloods aspect in his quest to like recover more of what he was? Because he still wants the power. He wants to be Mistborn again, and he is not. And that's clearly important.
But I don't know if he has any connections, really. And I think that a person who doesn't have connections and maybe can't form connections is always someone to be afraid of.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous. And I think maybe he can still have connections because he can have cognitive realm connections. He can have spiritual connections. But I do think he's still dangerous because those are warped. They're missing a whole leg of the tripod, and a tripod without one leg cannot stand. Like he is in a precarious situation, I think. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier about we learned our lesson trying to put design into a physical body might also apply to Kelsier, who is now Thydakar.
That's what I was just thinking. Because if your spirit web knows what body is yours.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that even if you have hemalurgically stapled your cognitive aspect into a new physical body, there's going to be some situation of like organ transplant rejection.
Yeah, that's a great call. The
Yeah,
rejection.
where there's going to be something in your spirit web that is just always going to resist being in this body because it knows that it's not right.
And the organ might be placed in the body. The hemalurgic spike might have done the piercing necessary.
Like the spike is literally just keeping it there, but that doesn't mean that the spirit web isn't like, bleh.
Resisting, right?
Yeah.
It's pulling apart. It doesn't want to be part of this fake body, this other body.
Yeah.
Because it knows that it had a connection to another body and it's not this one.
Yeah.
And we definitely do not think that Kelsier like had his old body dug up.
Oh my God, that would be terrible.
And he's zombie.
I don't think
Kelsier.
so.
I think we joked a long time ago about like zombie Kelsier.
I mean, he is still a zombie. Like still would categorize him as a zombie, as this weird, like living dead thing.
I'm just hoping that he got a fresher corpse.
I think he did get a
for
fresh
his Frankenstein.
Yeah, I think he got a fresh body. He probably specifically killed someone, to be honest. He probably was like, yeah, that one. I want that one. And then
anyone who's noble, just, you're getting a little uppity. I'm going to take you for my body.
Or specifically not a nobleman. He was like, I'm not taking a nobleman's
dirty.
body. Yeah, gross.
What we do see on Thydakar are the scars. That is the trick.
Yeah.
Kind of early on, or the reveal early on, is that the scars up the arm are present on...
But that's not difficult to just make them again.
I'm not saying it's difficult to make them again. I'm saying he may not have needed to make them again because his spirit web might have been so connected to the scars.
You think it
like
could,
wrote
onto
like the new body.
manifest?
Yes. It basically like created the scars because
maybe
Kelsier needs the scars to be Kelsier.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there is a connection between how someone views themselves and how they appear. And we see that in how like different Knights Radiant are healed or not healed when they become radiant, depending on how they perceive themselves. So yeah, I would imagine Kelsier would imagine himself with his scars. Can his cognitive aspect make that manifest on a body that's not his own? That's the question. And it seems like the answer is yes, but I think that's still a question.
Let's go over to another world hopper who struggles with this aspect of filling up a human body, being human, and covering up some of the scars of their actual self.
We haven't talked about her yet, and you've all been waiting for it. I know. We are going to finally talk about Masaka, aka Chinnik Dakorich, the 60th horde of the Natritakith strain.
That's a fun name that I will be simplifying to Masaka.
Yeah. She would prefer that anyway, so Masaka says thank you.
Masaka's a young sleepless, and they prefer to identify as the human girl that we see. Kind of a maybe slightly foreboding Wednesday Addams-esque vibe.
Yeah, she's got a real Wednesday thing going on. She wears all black. She's usually kind of keeping to herself, just like drawing. And she can come off quite severe when Yumi meets her for the first time. But inside, she seems quite sweet. And she says, quote, "Human girls like cute things. We like cute things." She looked up and almost seemed ready to cry. "We made such a good human. You can't even see the seams on our skin so long as we wear makeup and clothing with long neck portions. The trick is to make the entire face in one piece. Took years of breeding." End quote.
I find the Sleepless Society so interesting.
Yeah.
The glimpses that Brandon keeps giving us, we saw it in Dawn Shard. We now see it again with Masaka. In the regular Stormlight Archive books, we get hints about the Sleepless. Clearly, Brandon wants them to be part of the Cosmere in a bigger way. And then we have this person who is kind of a rebellious version, or at least an isolated version.
Yeah. Yeah, her story is very interesting, just in the life that she has chosen to pursue. Before we get to that, can I just drop in a couple of other like funny tidbits about her personality
Yeah,
and her
of course.
Wednesday Addams-ness?
Does she play the instrument very intensely?
Unfortunately, no. But she is truly obsessed with so-called cute things, and she gifts Yumi a picture of a bunny that is supposed to be cute, but it has these like creepy black hole eyes. And then she also gifts Yumi a knife that she says is very good for like disemboweling shelled organisms, but it's cute because it has flowers on the handle. See? Cute. It's so funny.
That to me was the most Wednesday-esque vibe of the roommate that she stays with in the Netflix TV show.
Yeah.
Just being like, I got you this knife for disemboweling your enemies. It has flowers.
So it's cute.
It's cute.
But yes, the life that she is living is specifically to avoid conflict and avoid war. She says, quote, "Don't tell anyone what we are, please," Misaka said. "We are tired of people being scared of us. We are tired of wars. We like painting. Please," end quote.
This to me is the most heartbreaking realization.
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, the Sleepless have been avoiding wars. They have been in hiding. They maybe experienced wars in their past, but this long, shroud that's been covering the Sleepless homeland of Amia hints to this concept of like them in the darkness. So what I'm worried about is that Stormlight 5 is going to bring them out of the darkness in a way. And that
I don't know if we know that Amia is their homeland.
Not necessarily homeland,
we
but definitely
know
where
that
Sleepless
they are all over the Cosmere, and
Right.
we know that they have been actively engaged in this protection campaign of the Dawn Shards. And so I imagine that even though they are in the background, they're kind of in a Cold War.
Exactly.
So like,
a
yes,
Cold
they
War.
are like quote unquote like staying out of things, but they are fighting their own fight, and they have been fighting their own fight. Plus, there is dissension within Sleepless ranks. And so there's also like infighting. So not only are they fighting an external war that they must be perfectly stealthy about,
Yes.
so adding a layer of difficulty, but then they're also have internal conflict to deal with. That's a lot of conflict. I feel Misaka. Get out of there. That's a lot.
Yeah, definitely hop out of that circumstance because it creates tension, it creates conflict, and I think that as the temperatures rise on Rashar, especially, as Odium is now maybe more directly clashing with the people of Rashar and the Knights Radiant, you have that Cold War that's getting hotter and hotter and hotter,
Yeah.
which makes sense as a perfect time to bail. You're probably growing up in this society. Misaka would be witnessing all of this tension, but also like recognizing it as a cold tension in the background. But then as things heat up, she's just like, nah, I ain't for this.
And if you ever make a mistake, if you're not stealthy enough and humans see you as a Sleepless, yeah, I imagine you're not getting a great reaction from most people. They probably, scream in disgust and like try to kill you and stuff. So that I think also just adds to Misaka's desire and fear here. Desire to be just one thing, to just be human, and fear of anyone knowing that she's anything other than human.
It is interesting to note that her desire to be human and to eventually get to a point of kind of stasis as a human also led to her evolution of ability. She said she took she took generations of breeding to make a single human face for her to occupy or to, exist through. But by the time we see her as Misaka, she has kind of given up learning Sleepless abilities.
Yeah. Instead, she has dedicated herself to learning human things like painting. However, even though she is mostly living as a human, she does send out hordlings when she first arrived on the planet, she sent out hordlings to sort of get the lay of the land of Komashi, which is how she's able to help Yumi and Painter and Design put this map together. And we learn something about these sleepless hordes from Design. Quote, hordes have incredible spatial awareness, comes from having bodies that can spread out to the size of a nation. Her guess will be more accurate than most people's instrument-measured surveys, end quote.
We also see the fact that Masaka, Design, and Hoid remain in contact after the events of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, giving them updates on Komashi as well as Painter and Yumi's relationship.
So cute. I love that she like has little pen pals.
That's what I really want for her.
And she can just like be herself with them because they know she's a sleepless, but they like don't judge her for it.
And are not spoiling the secret in any way.
Yeah. I think it is said that she gets a little bit more comfortable like with people knowing what she actually is as time passes. But I love that for her.
That's our big 3 world hoppers. But let's talk about some of the other Cosmere connections.
Yeah, our little grab bag of a few tidbits that were quite fascinating.
We see, for example, language or linguistic connections to other planets. One of the most obvious being the honorific Nimi being added to several words.
Yes, obviously we've seen this with Nightblood and
Zeth.
Yes, where he calls Nightblood Sword Nimi, and it is this honorific suffix. So my question is, how do these connect? Did the Shin learn this from Komashi? Did Komashi learn it from the Shin? Do they share a parent language? Were they at one point one people? I don't think that that's right because they have very different physical aspects, but the idea that maybe they share a parent language, I think, is somewhat compelling.
Yeah, the question of like a parent language, is Komashi the parent language? We've barely even talked about Utol being in this and the Shodel.
Right.
So is that the parent language?
And then this is further complicated by another vocabulary word, a Cosmere vocabulary word, so to speak, that shows up. The people of Komashi use my pawn sticks, which are, basically chopsticks. But we have seen my pawn sticks before in the Rose Empire on Cell. The people of the Rose Empire, like Shai, use my pawn sticks, as do the Jindo on Cell. And the my pawn are described as looking a little bit more similar to Painter and Yumi, with darker skin and like fine features. But then it's like, okay, so where did these people's language come from? Did it come from Cell? Or did it come from Roshar? Or is this all from some parent language of Yolen? Like, who knows?
It's definitely difficult to pinpoint an origin as we don't have the timeline. Or
are they picking up all of these things from world hoppers? From people coming to their planet? Like,
that's what I think.
Did someone bring my pawn sticks with them and then just give them to the people of Komashi and we're like, hey, you can eat with these little sticks. Here's how you do it. They're my pawn sticks. And then they just adopt it?
To me, that actually makes more sense, as Komashi is such this weird place that has been visited but doesn't have a lot of capability to change over time,
right? Because
of the shroud and the way that everything exists. So if you had a visitor from an outside world in the distant past, they might have been able to have what should have been a small impact, but then the shroud happens, locking them into that same pattern over and over, and then you get the whole culture adopting one thing.
I like this idea of sort of everything on Komashi being secretly influenced by world hoppers that they don't know are world hoppers. Because another thought that I have had that I keep forgetting to mention on the podcast is, like, what do we think about the idea that the Father Machine, or at least the inspiration for the Father Machine, came from off-world, in the same way that the people of First of the Sun are given, like seeded with these technological things that they then reverse engineer and figure out new technologies from. Because it seems very strange that a world that is as agrarian and what we would call primitive as the world we see Yumi living in would also have such an incredible machine without any visible steps to get there. You know, like how did they go from these relatively simple, or at least simple to make in a certain way, fabrials, to completely building from scratch this big machine that clearly they didn't know how to operate super well. And so I really wonder if at least a seed of that machine came from an off-worlder, and the idea of even building an invested machine with a command came from an off-worlder.
Well, I have, of course, some speculation
Ooh,
for that.
Okay, tell me.
I think that we get a hint about what may have been influencing the father machine, as you just laid out, in Design and Hoyd's eventual plan to escape off-world.
Mm-hmm.
They say that they are hoping to hitch a ride on one of the local spaceships, the space bus, and hopefully get to Iron 7 way station. Our speculation is that the way stations of the name Iron 7 are Scadrian way stations.
Right. Yeah, you would imagine that there would be this whole system, almost like a bus system, you know?
With bus stops.
Yeah, where you've got like the iron line and then the tin line, et cetera, et cetera. And so the iron stop would be where they're going, and they can like hop to a different place. But it seems to make sense that that would be built by the Scadrians.
And so I don't think it's crazy to imagine we have a similar situation to what we saw play out on First of the Sun, where the Scadrians arrive in the Utol Komashi system, maybe more interested in Utol, maybe not even really knowing that Komashi is there, so to speak.
Yeah.
But they eventually bestow a metallic machine that is able to accomplish something great, something wonderful. And then the people of Komashi want to copy that and do so, eventually leading to the building of the father machine. Like you said, kind of reverse engineering.
Yeah. Or it could have been like a meeting of scholars, you know, like some group
Silverlight scholars.
Of scholars. Yeah, Silverlight scholars or Nulthian scholars are hopping around the Cosmere. They've got space travel. They come to Komashi, meet some Komashi scholars, right? And then they're like, hey, we're here to learn. Like, what can you teach us? And we'll learn from you and you'll learn from us. And this is a great little teaching opportunity, as scholar type people do.
Yeah, and it's a machine. We have to remember that its main purpose is simply to draw energy through and via the spirits, right? That's like the main purpose of the father machine.
Stack rocks, attract spirits, make energy.
Cool. If you were a scholar visiting a more primitive or just a different culture, one of the first things that you might bestow upon them as like a gift of like, hey, I don't know if you were aware of this, but energy can be created, you know, maybe let's say in our world it would be something like coal can be burnt in this way to create a factory. Oil can be discovered by drilling, you know, in certain spots along the planet, and you can do XYZ with that. A scholar could show up and say, we have a way to make energy, and you should find your way of making energy.
Right.
And all the other scholars are like, that's a really good idea. We need energy to like advance.
I mean, literally, even just if someone showed up and told them like, it's possible to create a machine that runs on investiture, and then you just give it a command and it does what you want it to do. Right? They say something simple like that, and then the scholars of Komashi are like, okay, cool. Like we can figure that out. But clearly they didn't have all of the they needed a mentor. They needed an intergalactic mentor to help them through this process, and they were really let down by the interstellar community.
Yeah, as is so often the case, the people who were actually doing the like transit from place to place are not the best ambassadors.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, as old world meeting new world, the Columbian exchange brought a lot of like disease and death across the oceans. And maybe the best ambassadors were the people sitting back on the other continents going like, no, it's fine over here. Like I'm happy, being the ambassador to France or whatever country was operating at that time. Just be like, it's chill. I don't need to go across the ocean on a wooden ship for 6 months, risking blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But the people who are willing to do that, and maybe the people who are willing to go through Iron 7 way station, are not the best ambassadors. They're like, hey, don't know if you guys know this, but like, energy is free if you can channel your investiture. Figure it out. Peace out.
Especially if they are arriving to try to gain something from the planet.
Exactly.
I could see them showing up on Komashi and being like, there's not really anything here from us. For us, we're way advanced beyond this. So like, we'll give the locals this little present, quote unquote, and then like, bye. And it's like their version of a malaria blanket.
So we've talked a lot about the world hoppers, the visitors, the potential like inspirations for a lot of the bad stuff that happens on Komashi coming from off-world. But we also have to say that it's very strange to me that Utol is a very prominent system in the Cosmere history or timeline.
Is it?
Well, just that it's mentioned as being the home of the Shodel. And those people are...
Well, it's not the home of the Shodel. There's just Shodel living there.
That's a good point.
There's Shodel all over the Cosmere, though, and their home is Yolen.
Is on Yolen. And so you have these people who are as old as Hoid, who are living on Utol.
We don't know that they're as old as Hoid. They could be having babies this whole time. They're just
I'm not saying the individuals. Yeah, I'm not saying the individuals. I'm saying
okay.
The Shodel as a species has existed since before the Shattering.
Yes.
They are on Utol. To me, that makes Utol very important because it's one of the homes of a race of people that has existed in a seemingly unbroken line, unlike everyone else we know in the Cosmere. There's maybe the listeners that you could say are comparable on Rashar, maybe something going on with
humans.
The Aethers. There's definitely humans, but like all of the humans on the planets now are impacted by the shards in those systems.
But they are descended from humans from Yolen. Well, some of them anyway.
Some of them are humans from Yolen.
Yeah.
Some of them are straight up created. Like all the Skadrians are just
created. Yes.
golems out of the earth of ruin and preservation. But I think it's just notable that the Shodel are on this planet Utol. Seemingly, they got there from Yolen. So they have the ability to transit planets.
Yeah.
And then they're in a binary planetary system with Komashi, and yet are not visiting all the time. And this question was brought up on the 17th shard by user Oltux72, great friend of ours, basically asking, why was Komashi uncontacted? And I think first we should go to a quote from Hoid during that like exposition dump towards the end of the book.
Yeah, I mean, the basic answer is that they were contacted. After Kilihito, the city, successfully sends a mission to Utol and meets the Shodel, we get, quote, they were not alone in the Cosmere. It's an important revelation for a society, second only to realizing that the rest of us have been visiting for quite some time now, but never got around to explaining, end quote.
That's what I think is so interesting, is that they may have been visited. They had all of this activity probably going on around them.
Yeah.
And nobody bothered to explain to the people of Komashi what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, why would you? If you're not part of an official dispatch, if you're just kind of a one-off here and there, like, who wants that responsibility to be like, hey, let me explain this entire Cosmere thing to you and like tell you about space travel and tell you about all the other, like, no, people are just going to go blend in, do what they need to do, take their vacation, whatever, and then get out. Like, no one wants to have that hard conversation if it's just you, if you're not there as literally part of an envoy to enlighten the people of Komashi.
That's what I'm saying. I'm a fan of the United Cosmere Nations. I want ambassadors to be sent to everyone. I think that there needs to be a lot more.
I don't know. I respect people's ability to just like drop in, blend in, go about their business, don't screw anything up.
What is of note and brought to the attention by another user from the 17th Shard, Wander Nearby, who says, quote, "My guess is that the reason that they were uncontacted by the Shodel is because the Shodel need or greatly desire a similar ocean to sail on. Utol is completely covered in oceans, and the only other Shodel we see on screen was a sailor in the Lost Metal," end quote. I think this is great knowledge to remember about the Shodel, at least on Utol, and seemingly they have an affinity for the oceans. And from Yumi's perspective or knowledge, she says that the planet is so hot and she knows of no oceans.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that in the period of time when the Shodel on Utol could have traveled over to Komashi, they looked at it and were like, no oceans, no thank you.
I don't know if they would have even seen Komashi or if the shroud would be hiding it from anyone like seeing it.
You can see out, but you can't see back in.
Right. And maybe world hoppers like Hoyd or Scadrians who are really familiar and practiced can go there simply because they know it's there.
They're scanning like dark space matter and nobody else can see it, but they pick up something that the shroud isn't like covering up.
Or, I mean, again, depending on the timeline, they may have mapped this system before the shroud, and then they can just find that point in their navigation, go to the point, like they know it's there, they don't have to see it.
Right.
They can just go towards those coordinates. Maybe.
No, I definitely think that, yes, from my understanding of physics, that should be very possible because we do that here with our dumb monkey brains on Earth all the time when we're basically measuring the effect of gravity and then assuming a planet or other celestial body exists
there,
even though we can't see it.
Context clues.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so, yes, maybe they are using context clues to find Komashi. But then my question, like Oltok 72, why didn't the Shodel do that?
Because they can't see it. They don't know it's there.
But they can travel through space.
Can they?
Yeah. Well, can these people who exist on Utol right now travel through space? I don't know. But the Shodel are not from Utol. They travel.
But they could have come to Utol through the cognitive realm because we have seen them travel the cognitive realm.
They didn't ever travel.
There's a lot of people showing up a lot of places with no spaceships, my friend.
And because this is a system with a shard in the past, virtuosity would have existed. We should expect virtuosity having shard pools.
And I believe specifically it was said that virtuosity existed in the system, not like specifically on Komashi.
Right.
So theoretically, her influence would have been felt on Utol as well.
Utol could have been the major planet that felt her influence, and Komashi only a secondary planet. Or it could have shifted over time, whereas like we don't know the timeline.
They could have been even. She could have loved both of her children the same, which is why they're in a dual orbit.
What we do know is that Utol operates as kind of this beacon, this inspiration for the people of Komashi, even within the Shroud, even with all the difficulty of their civilization.
It is the only light. Well, supposedly, it is the only light that pierces through the Shroud. If that light comes from Utol or not, we don't actually know.
And we don't know the source necessarily of that light. Is that like a virtuosity gift, a last gas type of thing of their power? We don't know. But this concept of a lighthouse through the Shroud, I do think is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, this brings me to my last sort of Cosmere vocab word for the week, which is that in the book, there is a word that's sort of translated from us. Yumi and Painter go to a carnival, and Hoyd lets us know that they don't actually use the word carnival, but, quote, the word they do use roughly translates in your language to place of a million lights. Their term for workers there, light keepers, end quote. And that just binged in my head because it reminded me of Reno, our light housekeeper in Oathbringer. No clue if they're related at all, but it's just a connection that was made in my brain. And so here it is in our Cosmere connections.
I think the existence of Reno in a lighthouse, the fact that our heroes, go to the lighthouse, and the concept of light keepers in this world that's so reliant on a single beacon of light, all of it probably means something that I just can't quite grasp at this point.
And the silver light that is coming through the shroud, I'm not going to let it go, people. I'm not going to let it go. No one likes this theory, but I love it.
I think what we can say for sure and with confidence is that Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is a relatively simple story. It's a love story. It's about two people meeting, across worlds, coming together.
Making each other better people, balancing each other out.
But at the same time, Brandon is weaving in a whole bunch of Cosmere aspects. World hoppers, spiritual, cognitive, and physical realm aspects. We're learning about
investiture machines,
different awakened abilities and what that can be and the damages that can come from that.
Spiritual realm connections and what they can accomplish.
And then also space travel through the physical world, which we expect to be a huge part of the Cosmere going forward.
All of this just sets me up with even more excitement to dive deeper into Secret Project 4. Really, really cannot wait to get this book club underway. So we're going to sign off now so that we can go read. Yeah?
Join us in the reading. I think it's going to be so fun to break down Secret Project number 4. We'll do that in the same vein, kind of a lot of first reactions, first theorizing. I do love the concept, though, of revisiting all of the secret projects.
And doing a debrief.
I do believe there's going to be a Cosmere drought of sorts before the eventual release of Stormlight 5.
Yeah.
And so
I know.
We might be putting a reread of the secret projects, not necessarily a episode by episode breakdown, but, kind of incorporating all that we learn across all of the secret projects.
Yeah. I think maybe doing a, crazy man with a theory board with strings and tacks sort of episode with all of the secret projects could be cool. But then also I've got to put on our roadmap. We have done a Skyward book club on this podcast, and we're getting a new Skyward book soon. So I think we got to do a Defiant book club for this last installment.
I absolutely agree. I think that we will have a lot of fun with our Secret Project number 4 book club here on Patreon. The main feed will be releasing Yumi episodes over the next few weeks, and you, the very special patrons, get ready for Secret Project number 4. We're excited about it. We've loved all of the participation, thoughts, and theories that have been thrown out throughout this book club. Keep them coming as you read through the next Secret Project. And let's finish this year strong. Sanderson strong.
Sanderson strong. Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.